Uh, Very excited to be talking about a topic that I've really been quite interested in for some time, and got to explore it in the last couple months in further detail. So as Heather gave you a little bit of a background on myself, I'm the VP of Sales at Envirotech. If you're not familiar with Envirotech, we are Canada's leading provider of low carbon and remanufactured office furniture. Now, we were actually chatting a little bit before this about kind of my background in sustainability. And I mentioned to them that, really it all started actually 8 years ago when I started in the furniture industry. I kind of became known as the WELL guy because I became one of the first WELL APs in Canada. I started teaching as a member of the WELL building faculty to organizations across North America. And really it was due to this belief that I had about how the emergence of WELL and FitWel, where a focus of human health in our built environment would really actually contribute to us taking care of the planet as well. Because things like better air quality or water quality or food quality, they're great to have indoors, but clearly they're crucial to our survival outside of our buildings as well. And while I still believe that WELL is doing its part in addressing the growing crisis of chronic disease, I started fearing that we were walking blindly into a greater crisis of climate change under these blanket terms of sustainability and wellness without actually having a clear path or perspective on how we can create meaningful change. So therefore, this presentation was really designed to pull the curtain back and look at how furniture in particular in our interior spaces plays a role when it comes to decarbonizing our built environment. So we're going to look at a number of different things today, but we're going to start by really understanding the elephant in the office, furniture, and the inconvenient truth about it. And it's not just how much of it ends up in our landfills. We're going to look at carbon and why I believe it's going to be the currency of the circular economy era that we are about to enter into. Primarily, we're going to dive into how we can rebuild our workplaces through this concept of circularity. And then I'm going to get Noreen back on the call, or she's, I guess, on this entire time, but we're going to bring Noreen in and talk about a specific example where remanufacturing in particular was integrated at scale and talk about that process and that project in further detail. So to start, let's talk a little bit more about office furniture. And I think that it's important to actually, before we dive into the specifics, look at the big picture. And there was two real things that struck me when I was learning more about, obviously, our journeys toward net zero. So one is obviously that we're building a lot more buildings. The global building floor area is expected to double by 2060, which is essentially the equivalent of adding a New York City to the global floor plate every month for roughly 40 years. And the monumental task ahead of us there is obviously reducing the upfront carbon of the materials that we're building those buildings out of, right? But more importantly, and what I was thinking about, is the frequency in which we're replacing the materials inside of our buildings. And we were seeing this firsthand. And as I started to dig deeper, I started finding that more and more we're starting to look at the impact of interiors when it comes to the conversation around embodied carbon. This is a quote from Jen Chen, the principal at LMN Architects, talking about how at first, when you thought about when the building's being built, the embodied carbon of the envelope and the structure seemed high. But when you take into account the cyclical nature of interiors and how often things get remodeled and replaced, well, it starts to really add up. And that cyclical nature has accelerated and has been accelerating for the past 10 years, but really kind of went full speed after COVID-19. And when you start to look at a building, and when you look at a 40-year life cycle of a typical office building, furniture from virgin resources can actually contribute up to 30% of the carbon footprint of that building over its entire life because of the incredibly high churn rate of furniture when it comes to how often it's replaced or how often it goes out of style. And when you look at specific products that we're building into those spaces, so I pulled from probably one of the most iconic chairs in the world, a lifecycle analysis that looks at the environmental impacts of that chair. You'll notice that in red there are the essentially the impact from raw material extraction and production, which is primarily the most carbon intensive part of building new products and materials. And this is common amongst almost all new furniture products and materials. And it's so common that embodied carbon is now being pegged as also the elephant in the room because it's accounting for about almost 60 to 80% of the building sector's emissions, especially when you start to factor in interior fit out. So let's look at what that actually means. Now, typically, when we're looking at operational carbon versus the embodied carbon in the core and shell, it takes about on average 20 years for the operational carbon to catch up with the embodied carbon and the upfront carbon of that build. But when you start to factor in interior fit outs to the mix, that's when things start getting really interesting. Because the time it takes for that operational carbon to catch up with the embodied carbon stretches to about 37 years. And that's based on 8.5-year life cycles of interior fit outs, which unfortunately are not the new norm. In fact, office leases continue to get shorter and shorter due to a multitude of reasons, but due to rapid changes in the way we're working. Obviously, the pandemic had a role to play with that, but this has been happening for quite some time. And so when you're looking at a 50-year life cycle of a building, this is translating to almost 20 interior fit outs over the life of that building. And if these interior fit outs and refreshes and renovations continue to happen at their current pace, the carbon emissions from interiors alone can actually be at their worst 4 times higher than the embodied emissions of the core and shell of that building. So what does that mean? Well, that actually means that your average 30-story office tower, you're looking at, just from tenant fit out alone, 3,420 tons of carbon a year, or 1,386 tons of waste generated every single year. And if you're into the whole, how many trees do we have to plant to offset that kind of thing, it's roughly 342,000 mature trees every single year from interior tenant fit outs alone. And the unfortunate truth about office furniture is that, based on most estimates and what we see every day, is that less than 10% of it is actually used beyond the first office it inhabits. No matter how many certifications that product has or how well it's said is made to last, it just doesn't happen. And the problem is that we've come to this make or break point right now in the fight against climate change. And our linear take, make, waste model is really not serving our planet well. From fast furniture to fast fashion to cheap products to cheap money, essentially we've gotten ourselves to this point where a revolutionary change is needed to not just lower our embodied carbon emissions in our furniture, but really transition to a different type of thinking. And that's where I think the circular economy is going to play a key role, and why I believe that carbon is actually going to be this currency of the new era that we are entering into. Now, as many of you on this call are very aware, buildings contribute a significant portion of the global greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, estimates around roughly 40%. And so thankfully, I believe that it's been a good thing that we're almost evolving out of the sustainable building era and entering into this new era of decarbonizing our built environment, with multiple players from JLL to Cushman & Wakefield to CBRE talking about how real estate owners who drag their heels of decarbonization will do so at their own peril. And at the same time, we're seeing certain interior design groups pledging to eliminate embodied carbon into the commercial spaces that they're designing. And one of the key ways to really reduce the embodied carbon in their interior spaces is by introducing circularity or circular economy principles into their procurement. So for those who aren't familiar exactly on how the circular economy works, essentially it's an environmental and economic powerhouse compared to the traditional take, make, waste linear economy, where the circular economy is really focused on transforming, collecting, reusing, remanufacturing, and reimagining products to essentially keep them and keep those assets in circulation for as long as possible. Now, beyond just reducing the carbon impact, creating more jobs, lowering obviously costs as well on projects, multiple studies are showing and demonstrating just how much circular economy principles and circularity can lower the carbon footprint when it comes to the materials and products that we're specifying every day. With multiple studies showing on average savings of up to 50%, carbon savings up to 50% or more when using pre-owned, repurposed, or remanufactured products, with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory demonstrating that remanufacturing office furniture can actually reduce the environmental impact of that furniture by as much as 70 to 90%. So how does remanufacturing specifically reduce that impact so much? Well, It all comes down to the fact that a lot of furniture is still very carbon intensive when it comes to extracting raw materials to manufacture that new. When you look at remanufacturing, essentially there's a significant reduced material extraction and production needed to make that same product. Estimates are anywhere between 85% fewer raw materials than traditional manufacturing. Along with that, you also have significantly lower energy inputs, because when you're not building a product from scratch, you're using about only 15% or so of the energy required to build new products. And then you have the added benefit of waste reduction, where using a remanufactured product can reduce the waste by about 70 to 90% compared to traditional manufacturing. The image on the right is actually our remanufactured workstations and seating, which were strategically sourced for Canada's first FitWel office, which was really one of the first that I remember, which was trying to measure the carbon impact as well of their fit out. And when we've looked at our own products, in 2022, we had a third-party Ecoform do a life cycle analysis of both our remanufactured seating and our remanufactured workstations. And when we compared those findings to the original manufacturers, in this case, it was a remanufactured Aeron chair with the OAM Aeron chair from Herman Miller, the findings were in line with what we were seeing in studies. Savings of up to anywhere between 90% or more compared to getting that chair new. And more organizations are looking at some of these creative repurposing, remanufacturing ways to address the big part of the pie in measuring their emissions, which is scope 3. So everyone on this call is probably somewhat familiar with scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. I think we'll probably be becoming more and more familiar with how much scope 3 has to do with an organization. This in particular was just Microsoft's 2021 sustainability report that looked at where its emissions were coming from. And those tiny little parts of the pie there, with scope 1 being 0.8%, scope 2 being 1.16%, with scope 3 being the rest of the pie, has really spurred some conversations into really reducing the amount of new materials and new products that they need to use every day and extending the life of their assets. And that's really what's brought the circular economy and circularity to the forefront as a strategy to lower scope 3 emissions. So with that, where are we today in the circular economy? Well, the unfortunate truth is we're not doing great. And part of the reason, I believe, is because we're still very much focused on certifications as opposed to transitioning into more of a measured approach of reuse and remanufacturing at scale. And based on a study done last year by Circularity Gap, we're finding that we're actually getting worse with the amount of materials that are making their way, virgin natural materials that are making their way back in the economy after their first use. We're looking at, from 2018, it was about 9.1% of materials that made their way back, 8.6% in 2020, and now we're at 7.2% in 2023. So the question is, what is stopping us then? If we know that circular economy and circularity principles are going to be key in reducing those scope 3 emissions, what's stopping us from achieving a circular economy? There's a number of different reasons, but I'll focus on a few. One of the biggest things is fast furniture, right? Because furniture that is not built to last cannot be rebuilt for multiple life cycles. There's a big problem with getting products that essentially are very inexpensive, but they encourage wasteful consumption because of how frequently they need to be replaced or how frequently they're discarded. The other big thing is take-back programs. And, you know, this might be controversial in some senses, but a lot of it is used more for marketing and lacks real transparency. And what I mean by that is that until manufacturers have their own guaranteed take-back program, it's all done through multiple third parties, where an organization can be getting rid of their furniture and a manufacturer or new dealer who's focuses only on new furniture is going to try and get that product out of there so that they can sell more new furniture. The product does never go back to that original manufacturer, and that's what's causing really a gap in terms of closing the loop. Now, we are seeing some manufacturers, specifically the one that everyone's aware of is IKEA, right? IKEA started actually introducing a program where they would take back their own products and rebuild or repurpose and remanufacture them for a different use. And as soon as that started happening, they started actually building their new products to different models because they were the ones now responsible essentially for reselling and repurposing those. So we need to really think twice about the transparency behind take-back programs and ways that we can close the loop to future-proof to really create and accelerate towards a circular economy. Regulations is another big thing, right? Because we need to have policies that penalize, obviously, waste disposal and really encourage that element of reuse and remanufacturing and repurposing at scale. We're seeing this in some areas in Europe. I believe France last year or 2 years ago introduced a policy that essentially was about 20 to 30% of all their new government federal procurement had to be reuse or remanufacturing. What that actually created was one of the major manufacturers kind of partnering and opening up shop there to take back their own product and start to actually reintroduce that back in as a remanufactured and repurposed option. So the power of procurement is very important in terms of accelerating this movement. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that with Noreen at the end of the call. The other really big thing is market demand, because there still is this preference, unfortunately, for new cheap goods over quality pre-owned items. And there still is a stigma, especially in interior design, around this idea of pre-owned, used, remanufactured, these terms that really kind of put a hesitancy on a designer or a client or a furniture specifier of how to introduce those into their projects. And so, again, hopefully this is something that that through education and through certain projects where we kind of pilot this new type of approach, we can see some changes in that sense and accelerate the movement to rebuilding our workplaces through circularity. So I'd like to take this time here to really kind of paint the picture of where we are, what we're seeing in our industry right now, and hopefully inspire you to look at essentially rethinking the status quo on ways that we can rebuild our workplaces in this very interesting time and exciting time that we're in right now when it comes to the workplace. Because right now, you might be aware that renovation work is outpacing new construction for the first time in decades. And there's a whole host of organizations that are essentially shifting their spaces, right? Whether it's downsizing, whether it's completely reconfiguring it. But overall, what we're seeing is there's a lot of product that is ending up in a landfill. So I think that this is a once in a generation chance to demonstrate ways that we can rebuild the workplace of the future through circularity. And there's kind of a number of different strategies that I think we can start to use, and that I'll illuminate with some clients who have and organizations who have gone these ways that will get us to where we can decarbonize our workplace, hopefully in the future through a hybrid approach in circular procurement. So the first is, again, really rethinking the status quo. But with that, we need to start small, think big, and think big is what I'm going to bring in Noreen to talk about a remanufactured project that really kind of changed the landscape of what's possible. Be bold, quality above all, and then we need to really be closing the loop to future-proof. So when I talk about rethinking the status quo, I'm talking about a couple things, but you know, it's interesting. I keep thinking of this term hybrid, and actually the last Carbon Leadership Forum that I was, or the last event that I was at, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, again, they were talking about how in a particular building, you know, integrating a full heat pump wasn't the right approach. It actually needed to be a hybrid solution of a heat pump and natural gas. And this is kind of exactly where we're at in the workplace, and where we started with the, you know, the EV movement in automotive, right? Where what we need to do is really rethink the status quo of, typically, for as long as I can remember it, it's a designer develops a layout, develops a spec, sends it to 3 new furniture dealers, and that's essentially how the process works. I think we need to rethink our procurement strategies to design a new landscape built on a hybrid model, because it's historically been a one or the other type of approach. There's the people who focus only on new product, then there's remanufactured product, and then there's the whole category of certified pre-owned products. But I think that, similar to what we were what I was talking about or hearing about 2 weeks ago in the last event, there needs to be a shift towards a hybrid model for furnishing our workplaces to really drive this change forward. And there's a number of benefits to a hybrid approach to furniture sourcing. One, obviously, it's significantly more cost effective, up to a 50% cost reduction based on your standard of typically just ordering new. It can reduce the demand for raw materials that we've seen and energy and reduce that carbon impact. There's a significantly faster delivery time as well, with pre-owned and remanufactured products reducing the lead times and keeping a project on schedule. Obviously, designers can get creative and blend new and vintage and reuse pieces to create a unique and character-filled workplace. But again, every single project that kind of takes a leap forward in this sense will demonstrate the potential for an industry-wide shift at a time when our industry really is transitioning and kind of becoming something completely different. And so I think that that's another area where we'll be getting more and more inspired by certain types of projects that take a different approach to furniture sourcing. And I'll give you one example this past year of a client who really took a brand new approach to furniture procurement that we've never seen, and the result has been fantastic. So this was a design firm locally in Toronto that essentially had a Fortune 500 company who was furnishing 70,000 square feet. And they started with their project baseline. And what I mean by project baseline is new. The status quo is new. Everyone can sell new. It's been kind of the way that things have been going as far as we can remember, is that that's your baseline. And it was about $2 million. But then the client said, well, how can we not only look at ways to reduce the embodied carbon of our fit out significantly, but also reduce our budgets? And that's when we were brought into the mix. And on our first proposal, we were able to incorporate around 30 to 35% remanufactured and pre-owned products. And that was around a current project savings of about $400,000 to the new products, with a carbon reduction, again, of around 30%. But the most interesting part of that whole procurement process was once we were awarded the project, the client said, well, can you go out now? You know exactly what what we have for the rest of the 70% that's new. Can we start sourcing that product or close enough product to that as a pre-owned or remanufactured option? And that's exactly what we did. Is over the next couple months, we had a cutoff date of when that client had to order new furniture to meet their deadline. But we were able to save them an additional $300,000. And in the end, the amount of repurposed, remanufactured, and certified pre-owned products that were integrated in that space was over 65%. And it was all based on a different approach to furniture procurement. Now, that's a big project, and not every project is going to have a client or have a designer who's willing to take that type of kind of, let's just say, radical approach to procurement. But I do believe that every project has an opportunity to start small, right? We know that when it comes to something like seating, so we also specialize in remanufactured seating, and we know that it's a very carbon intensive process to manufacture a lot of products new. And so one of the best ways we find is clients who are interested in what a remanufactured product could look like in their project, start small and integrate seating. These are two examples of clients who really kind of started with that approach, integrating remanufactured seating. The rest of the product that they integrated was new through us, but it got them really thinking for their next fit out. How can we incorporate more of this remanufactured solution? Now that we see the quality, the warranty, and the performance of that product, they're interested in learning more. So starting small is another great approach when it comes to decarbonizing our workplaces. Now, this is another really big part of where I get excited about the future of remanufacturing, is being bold. Because at Envirotech, we've been Canada's leading provider of remanufactured furniture solutions for over 25 years. And the funny thing is that I actually feel like we're just getting started when it comes to the remanufacturing revolution. But we focus primarily on remanufacturing workstations and seating. There's a lot of ways that I think the workplace is evolving. And these were a couple examples that we got inspired with, actually, by seeing this planter idea here of how you can repurpose a panel for something more than actually just, let's say, another panel system. And we partnered with a group in Calgary called 126 Design to develop this kind of brand new product based on a specific request from a client. that base is actually an offcut that they use for one of their products that they build locally. And we kind of just had this great creative process due to a client demanding kind of a better approach or a net zero approach, but wanting to have something that was mobile that could have multiple uses. So I think, especially for interior design, being bold and thinking outside the mold is going to be something where the remanufacturing industry will adapt, will grow, and innovate together to really find new ways of looking at products and solutions. Quality, above all, is going to be crucial for moving this transition towards a remanufactured and pre-owned solution, because we need to make sure that we are backing up and standing by the quality of the products that we are remanufacturing and giving multiple lives. That's why at Envirotech, we've always stood by our warranty. So our remanufactured workstations come with a lifetime warranty. Our seating comes with a 10-year warranty, because we believe that, again, choosing pre-owned furniture today is an investment in the now, but not everything currently we can access as a pre-owned or remanufactured option. So if you do need to select new furniture, we are big believers that you need to make sure it's a promise of its future reinvention, and making sure that we're selecting products that can be rebuilt for multiple life cycles. But lastly, I think that this idea of closing the loop to future-proof is going to be really what takes this industry to the next step, because there still is a gap when it comes to how products essentially are finding their way into a different home after, let's just say, the first office they inhabit. I think there's a lot of opportunities for manufacturers to partner with groups, to have dedicated remanufacturing partners, but to really track and make sure that when a client buys a product, they know exactly where it's going at the end of that life cycle, and that it's not left up to third parties to determine where it goes. And the more that we can do that and own those products past, ensure returns, the more we're going to be able to close the loop on a sustainable and low carbon future, I believe, when it comes to furniture. So the last thing is where I'd like to bring Noreen. Noreen Bevan is a furniture specialist and advisor at CBRE, and she is really well, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but she really demonstrated the power of procurement when it comes to driving innovation and change with a project this past year with the region of Halton. And essentially, the region of Halton mandated that their workstations for their upcoming renovation be remanufactured. And this wasn't necessarily 5, 10, 15 workstations. This was over 1,100 remanufactured workstations made to order. And so it demonstrated a potential opportunity for a much larger shift in this movement that we're seeing towards circularity within the workplace. So Noreen, thank you so much for joining. I'd love to ask you a couple quick questions, not quick questions, let's dive into them, about this particular project. But first, can you give a quick explanation on what your role means when it comes to being a furniture consultant or advisor?
Yes, so obviously I've been in the furniture industry for way too many years, and CBRE saw this as an opportunity to add to their, I guess, projects, the projects that they were PMing in Toronto and across Canada. So we are both, and I work with Sue Mann. So Sue Mann and I are the furniture advisory department of CBRE, and we're both advisors and consultants. So the difference really being that clients such as Halton, they will need at times advisory on kind of their overarching decisions based upon certain aspects of furniture. So as an example, Halton said, we need a report on what you feel we should be doing in the future. And that's where the whole environmental aspect of this came into play. And we also do consulting, which consulting is more of a task-driven role, where we do RFPs and we do assessing inventory of the corporations and whether we can use it, we can remanufacture it. So that's we have two roles that we can fulfill for clients.
Gotcha. That's great. So let's focus on Halton then. So what were the main objectives of the region of Halton when they were undertaking this project?
So the Halton project really entails, they have 1,100 people, and they renovated an existing 4-floor tower and then put up another tower. And their goal was to get more updated furniture, in particular workstations for their employees, because, and this was before COVID. This project's been 3.5 years to date, and that was very important to them. So this was part of the report that we had done initially, and then we got the budget for what they wanted to do, and it was quickly, we quickly figured out that they could not do new for the budget that they had. So they went through, many iterations of what they could be doing, one tower in new, one tower in existing. And we thought, you can do remanufactured workstations and save $1 million on your budget. And the simple reason is I had done a project for Catholic Children's Aid Society, I believe it's 5 years ago now, and they had the same situation, and the project was a huge success. That was the first project I did that was substantial in quantity of workstations. And so I explained this to the team at Halton, and basically said, you have a responsibility to be environmental in this process also, and they totally agreed. So they took our suggestion, and of course we did all the numbers relating to this, and we suggested we do an RFP for refurbished, remanufactured product. And a few of the team members from Halton said, we've never heard of that before. And we worked them through the process, and we did it, and we had a great response. There's other remanufacturers other than Envirotech. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that. But obviously we had done a very large project with Envirotech, and we were very we were pretty firm that they could do the project. So that's where it all started.
One quick thing before I ask the next question. Someone just messaged me saying they can't see Noreen when she's talking. Is that, do I need to stop sharing the screen, or how would you like to do that, Heather?
That should be, if you went into speaker mode, it should.
Is that happening with anyone else, or are you seeing Noreen when she's talking?
Anushka can see her.
Okay.
So maybe
Okay.
it's scrolling up and down on the image section.
It could be you're not in speaker view. If you go up to the top right-hand corner of this Zoom, there's this view. You can click on view. I don't know, maybe that's it.
Maddie also said that she can see Noreen and Heather as we speak, Heather being me.
Okay. Okay.
So I wonder.
Do you want me to get out of this and try that? I thought we did the speaker view at the beginning.
Yeah, it works for us. Maybe it's just not working for that one person.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I think everybody else can see.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. So that's a great explanation, Noreen, of kind of where it started. So based on your experience, both with, I guess, Catholic Children's Aid Society and now with Region of Halton, what are the key differences, or if you were talking to an interior designer, if you were talking to a furniture specifier, what are the key differences between a remanufactured product versus a used product?
Well, maybe you can bring up that next image. That
Okay.
would explain. So, as you can see, this was their a typical existing workstation, and these are as is. So when you purchase used furniture, this is what you could get. So everything is as is. You have to deal with different finishes, different configurations, different sizes of workstations. It is what it is. With remanufactured workstations, they take the panels, they can cut them down to, because most panels now are not usually above 51 inches high. And they cut them down, they respray the paint finish, they reupholster with a new fabric, they can paint the storage, and bottom line, it looks like new. Maybe Andy, you can show the next. So these are the stations that we're just installing. So typically work surfaces are new, and typically the storage is painted, panel top caps, end caps, and baseboards. And this is an example of a height adjustable table, I believe. And so basically you have to purchase the new height adjustable base. But as I said before, the savings was substantial. This is allowed Halton to put in this typical workstation for 1,100 people, and we're $1 million below their budget.
Noreen, do you know if you did or did anybody else do an LCA to determine what the embodied carbon savings were in this particular project?
It hasn't been done to date. Every time I mentioned, we need to, for their corporate social responsibility, because their employees are very involved in that and want to know. I suggested we do a lot of analysis afterwards, because the project was 1.5 years delayed due to COVID in the construction. So I think what they're going to do is wait until afterwards to really substantiate the environmental impact of the project.
But there is a plan to do it.
Yes.
From what you understand. Okay, that's good.
So Noreen, can you also share how you developed the specifications for the remanufactured workstations? So to give an idea, I guess, of for other tenders or people writing different tenders, what is the process of writing a tender or specifying remanufactured workstations for a project like this?
Basically, it isn't any different than specifying for new furniture. We, work with the client to find out exactly what they want to accomplish. We specify the furniture to the dimensions on test fits or space plan by the interior designers, architects, and we can build whatever, or the remanufacturers can build whatever is required, as long as you stay within the standard increments of panel sizes, but even work surface sizes can range, but really it isn't much different.
And so how was the feedback, or how has been the feedback from the region of Halton regarding the workstations? Were there any unexpected benefits or drawbacks from their perspective on this process?
Actually, just to appease the CAO and the leadership of Halton, because they were not aware that this could be done with remanufactured furniture. Phase 1 of the project was 44 workstations. So we suggested we do that phase initially, and that was done probably 1.5 years ago with remanufactured furniture. And we had done a small RFP to accommodate that. And we installed it. And I was involved with a couple of the walkthroughs of the senior management, and they couldn't tell the difference. I can tell the difference, but they couldn't. And I think that's what the team wanted to
I don't see any questions. Sorry, do you have more questions, Andy?
I guess let's do one last question, but based on the experience from this project, what advice would you give other organizations or other firms that are considering similar size remanufacturing projects?
Well, with this project, we started with what they wanted to accomplish in their budget, but now what we're doing is we're starting with how we can provide services that would get them what they require and what they want environmentally first. So as an example, we have two major clients right now. One is evacuating many floors, and they have fairly new workstations. And then we have another institution that needs furniture. And so we've negotiated basically the transfer of furniture from one to another, and helping them with the configuration, the details of doing that. So, and that's the way we started the project. So this is very exciting that you're having, this seminar, because I think it's really important we all start that way.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Noreen.
So I have a question. If nobody else has some questions, I don't see any more in the chat, but feel free to put some in. I have a couple more questions I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Noreen, I know there was some discussion in the chat about furniture as owner versus as a service. Have you had any conversations, I guess, with any of your clients about furniture being more of a service and less of an owned item? Does that discussion come up?
No, it hasn't.
One of the comments was that it's, I think from Elaine, she can elaborate on it if she wants, but it's much bigger in Europe. And so it doesn't sound like we're having a lot of success talking about that here. People still want to own their piece of their pie, I guess, right? Rather than something as a service. So in order to get started, I guess, and you may have touched on this, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but is it best to first get the information into the spec like we talked about before? Is it best to, if architects or interior designers are interested in, obviously we have to talk to the owner and have buy-in from the owner, but to get it into the spec, engage a furniture consultant, like how is it best to get started?
So each project varies in the way that it's handled,
Right.
And who's driving the project. And I think it's important to discuss the environmental impact on doing this with the decision makers at the clients. And because they're the only ones that can drive this decision. We can suggest, and we always do, but you may end up with a variation in the design of the workspace, which, it's difficult at times. So it may not work for all clients, but it's important to get to the decision makers.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But yes, I guess to make the decision or get in front of the decision makers first is probably best. And yeah, sorry.
It's very important that, especially these days, that companies, corporations, institutions can prove that they're being responsible environmentally.
Yeah. Yes, and that should be, like Andy talked about, that should be something that is mandated from the government, right? So we really need to get that.
Yeah, I think the biggest shift that we've seen at Envirotech is that, typically, again, organizations would come to us in the past for cost savings or to get product, more quickly than a traditional new product. that all kind of started shifting around COVID, where more organizations, especially larger organizations, were looking at, again, ways that they could measure their impact in terms of their fit outs, in terms of their spaces. And that's what's really been the most noticeable shift, right? Is that through Carbon Leadership Forum and many other groups, we're having these different conversations around, decarbonizing our spaces that really we were never having before. We were just kind of using sustainability as a blanket term for it. But now there's a real goal, I think, that we're trying to achieve. For many, it's obviously net zero by a certain date. And with that is creating more opportunities to have different conversations like this and rethink products.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you one other thing, Andy. When you're engaged on a project, do you automatically go in and do, because you showed in the one project, the big project that you did, the savings that were 30%, and then you went down to 50%, and then ultimately 65, I think you said, right? Do you automatically go in and do an LCA in order to get those numbers based on like a benchmark, a baseline, and then what you've provided? Like, is that your method?
So right now they're estimations based on LCAs for products we've done and not a full LCA of a specific project. There's a number of groups that like Reset that we're hoping of working with for some particular projects, primarily this one that I mentioned, and hopefully region of Halton as well. But that organization really has to be invested in diving into the details right now, so hopefully we get there. Right now they still are based on estimations, but hopefully as the process gets a little bit more more familiar, used more frequently, the costs to do those types of analyses will come down, and we'll be able to do a lot more of that on every project.
Yeah. So I'm just reading in the chat, as I understand from Jay from the TMU, as I understand, EPDs for furniture aren't as common as those for construction. That's
correct. Yes, there's still a lot of challenges when it comes to EPDs and furniture, not just due to availability, but how to compare them even, right? And where you're generating that data from at different cycles. So it will be challenging as we kind of move towards the next step of hopefully having a lot more EPDs and having that transparency. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not the same for furniture. It's great in construction though, right? And we can learn a lot from that.
So furniture needs to become a bigger part of the conversation, obviously. We talked about that at the beginning.
Yeah, and that's it. Well, and as more, more and more groups and companies start to think about it, I think the more we're going to start to see that type of shift in furniture and the products and materials we're building in our interior spaces.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. If there are no other questions, I'll give it a second, but are LCAs being taught in interior design school programs? That is a good question that I don't have the answer to.
I also don't have the answer to, but I speak actually at Conestoga College every year, so I can check with them next time I'm there to see if that is something that they do in their courses.
And they certainly weren't teaching it in architecture school when I was there, but that was quite a while ago. So it's something to look into and see that they actually start doing that as part of their sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I really appreciate it. Andy and Noreen, excellent presentation, really good food for thought. And it was excellent. Thank you again for sharing.
Thanks so much, Heather. Thank you, Noreen. Really appreciate being here. And yeah, looking forward to the next event.
Yep, we'll see you again.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll see you again.